You're going to need a basic set of tools to build your quadcopter, and we're going to talk about the essential tools only. There are lots of things you could add to your toolkit, but this is what you absolutely need. And we're going to start with the soldering iron. This happens to be my unit. It's made by Weller, and I want to point out this right here. This is the temperature control. This is essential to any soldering iron you use to build your quadcopters. If you have a soldering iron like this, with just a plug and no control, this is pretty much useless. You do not want to use this soldering iron. Throw this one away. With this, we have 5 settings, 1 to 5, which is 100 degrees Celsius to 500 degrees Celsius. Generally, I'm soldering about 400, 425 for most small points, and 500 for much large points or quick solder removal. So right about there is the good spot to be. Now I want to point out that this is an analog setup. Your soldering iron may vary if it's analog, so you'll learn what's the best temperature for your particular soldering iron. One of the things I want to point out to you is the tip on the soldering iron. This is a pointed tip. The Weller tips in particular are copper on the inside, and that makes for a good heat conductivity, and they do last a long time. It comes with a blunt large tip, which is good for battery pads, but not for general work such as ours. You're going to want to get this pointed tip, which is additional. It's about $7. I go through about 2 of these a year. They last long and they're good quality. I recommend an ST8 or an ST7 tip because it's nice and sharp and really will help you get into those fine points. Again, you don't need to get a Weller soldering iron, but this is a good one. Takes a little bit to warm up, but I highly recommend it. The next most important tool you're going to need is a good set of hex drivers. This is my set, and you need 4 sizes: 3mm, 2.5mm, 2mm, and 1.5mm. The 3mm driver you'll use occasionally, but really the others you'll be using quite frequently, especially that for the M2 and M3 size bolts, which are very, very common. Get a good quality set with hardened tips. There are cheap ones out there, but the better ones are less likely to strip your bolt heads. You probably already have a set of needle nose pliers. This is a very useful tool. You'll want to keep this, especially when you're in the field for reaching into quad frames and moving wires around. Some of the better ones actually have little wire cutters right there in the nip. So you probably have this. If not, they're inexpensive and pretty ubiquitous. Get them anywhere. One tool I use all the time are my micro pliers. These are 2 of my favorite. They came in a set, and you can see more of that in the tools video. You'll notice this one has straight tongs and it's flat on the inside, whereas this one has a bent nose. And this is my absolutely preferred model because, as you can see, if I'm working on something, the bent nose, my hand is relaxed, whereas the needle nose, I have to have my wrist way up high to use it. And that really makes this much easier to use because I'm always resting it on the table and helps me do more precise work. So a bent nose plier, I think, is a great tool to have. 2 of my other frequently used tools are the open end wrenches. These very well complement the micro pliers. These are the 2 most used sizes: the 5.5s and the 8s, metrics. You might notice I put these black bands. It's just liquid electrical tape, so I can find these easily and know which side I am grabbing for, so I don't have to fumble, especially in the field. Usually these sets come with a whole bunch of other sizes that I don't generally use, but I think this was under 10 bucks imported. So get yourself a pair of open-end wrenches. They're very useful. Another 2 highly used tools are my wire cutters. Now I got 2 kinds I'm going to talk about, the regular and the dikes. Now, the regular that I like here, we have a little locking mechanism there, is this right here. You notice the size right there? I can strip a lot of wires by just loosening this, turning the wheel, setting the size, and then I can just strip all the wires I want. This particular set is great because you'll notice it's an angle. It's flat on one side and it's got a deep V on the other. And this is good for close-in cutting of wires, so I have nice, clean, sharp cuts right where I want it. Where if I were cut with this, I may have a gap that would be undesirable. This is for precise cutting, for stripping, and general cutting. Gotta have a hobby knife, any hobby knife will do. You can pick these up anywhere. You just need to have a number 1 or a number 2 blade, and that will give you a nice sharp tip, and you will use this for 101 things. So get a hobby knife. Another occasional used tool would be some tweezers. Now this is just my wife's tweezers. They're just eyebrow tweezers, nothing special, but I think you could do better. I would recommend you get some electrostatic tweezers. This is one of my favorites. Again, I like the bent nose tools as opposed to the straight. I can work with my hands resting on the pad with these, whereas these, I have to be higher up. So that's why I always prefer the bent nose tools like these. Many quadcopter builders like to use socket drivers. This has to be mine. It is an 8mm driver, exactly the same as these open-end wrenches, which are also 8mm drivers. But the reason I like this is when I'm removing propellers, this is so much easier to use than this. All of them will get the job done, but the driver is just so much more convenient. Another tool I like, which is arguably not essential, is a set of hobby files. And the only reason that I would like this is because sometimes you have a carbon frame with a sharp edge and this can chamfer it down. For example, your battery strap. If the frame has a hard edge, it can cut the strap in a crash and you can solve that problem with this. Again, not essential, but it's nice to have and not expensive. And again, I'll have links to all these tools below. Here's a tool you never thought of. I use this all the time. Not everyone even uses this or knows about it. It is called a smudger. It is an electrostatic safe piece of plastic. It has a sharp tip and a driver-like end. And I like this because I can push wires through my quads. I can touch things when I'm working with solder, and this will not cause any problems. And it's just a nice tool to use. It's much more convenient than trying to shove something through with a hex driver. Anyway, it's nice to have, it's cheap, and I go through these, a few of them a year. Nice little tool to have. Here's a tool I use all the time, a set of helping hands. Now you probably haven't seen one that looks exactly like this because usually there's a magnifying glass on the top that I took off. These are generally $4 to $6 and they just move all the way around and you can position your circuit board and such in there when you're soldering, and it just makes things so much more convenient. Pick up one of these, good to have. You're going to be using heat shrink tubing, and to shrink them, you're going to need a heat gun. This is mine. This you don't need, not this model. This model is about $100. It's a professional grade unit, and it has all kinds of attachments to different jobs. This one will last me 100 years. You can get by with a $12 heat gun from Harbor Freight Tools or a $9 heat gun from Amazon. You can even get by with a cigarette lighter in some situations. But you should get a heat gun. Again, don't plan on spending more than $30 tops for a heat gun, and that will do all that you need. You are going to need a voltmeter to check continuity and voltages across different circuits when you have a problem. This is also a great safety tool to do a pre-check before you actually put live power on your new quadcopter build. Good safety tool to have, great tool to have, and we're going to talk about this when we actually use it. There is another video on how to use a voltmeter, and I encourage you to watch that. Here's a hot tip. If you're a man or a woman of a certain age, you probably got a set of these, reading glasses. Now, they're good for reading when you're here, but when you're working electronics, you're like here, 12 inches maybe from your face. And I don't know about you, but I can't read this. And I certainly can't see this well enough to do a quality job of soldering. So what's the solution? For me, I went to my optician and I said, I need reading glasses that work at 12 inches for doing electronics work. I bought the cheapest frame I could. I got the cheapest lenses I could. And now I can see this clearly. I can solder well and confidently. If I have very small screws and my very small hex driver, I can get it in there and see what I'm doing. It's so much of a comfort to have reading glasses for very close-in work. And if you're a young guy or woman and you don't need it, God bless you.